966.
This is the 966, episode 29. Richard Mumtaz, seems like we're really hitting our stride here.
Thank you.
We've got a really special show today. Tremendously excited to welcome back to the program David Des Roches. David is, of course, a professor at the National Defense University, a security expert, and he graciously agreed to join us on short notice here this week. We are keen to get his take on everything going on in Ukraine and how it relates to the Middle East region. Colonel Des Roches, welcome back aboard the virtual 966 super yacht.
Oh, it's an honor. I'm just looking for the customs agents with the seizure order around us.
Well, I think this makes, Colonel Des Roches is now one of one, which makes him the GOAT of the 966 podcast, the greatest of all time, because he's our first repeat special guest. It's a red letter day for sure.
Well, the phrase they used to describe me is recidivist. So, yeah.
We're going to send you some merch. So much to discuss today. We'll cover a lot of ground. We will talk Ukraine a lot, but we'll cover some Saudi-focused topics as well. Before we get started, just really want to thank everyone for listening and watching. Richard, the growth of this show has been really awesome to see, with more of you tuning in each week. A reminder that most of you who like to listen to the whole show, you can also jump around a little bit. We put show notes at the bottom so you can jump to different topics if you like. And on YouTube, a lot of these segments go out as standalone videos. So if you're interested in just some topics but not others, that's a great way to get the 966. And then one more thing before we get started, we've launched a new website for the 966. You can check that out and see everything we're doing at the 966podcast.com. Okay, let's get going. Richard, what's your one big thing this week?
And just like that, Saudi Arabia is going to be home of a major manufacturer of electric passenger vehicles. This week, the Lucid Group, in which the Saudi Public Investment Fund has a better than 60% stake, announced agreements with the Ministry of Investment, the Saudi Industrial Development Fund, and the King Abdullah Economic City to build a full production factory in Saudi Arabia. Construction of the plant is expected to start in the first half of this year. Initially, the plant will reassemble Lucid Air vehicle kits that are pre-manufactured at the company's primary manufacturing facility in Casa Grande, Arizona. Over time, though, the Saudi plant will build complete vehicles with a target peak capacity of 150,000 vehicles per year. Vehicles in the initial phase will be slated for the market in Saudi Arabia, which we know is very large. But Lucid will also plan to export finished vehicles to other global markets, including exclusive models, Lucian, designed to appeal to Lucid customers in the region and beyond. We want to be Lucid customers, so we'll try and get a design feature in. With the lease extending to 2047, this is a big win for Amar, the economic city, which is the master planner of King Abdullah Economic City. The estimate from Lucid Group management is that the location may result in up to a $3.4 billion increase of value to Lucid over 15 years.
Correction, Richard, we don't want to be customers. We want to be paid spokesmen, and we want to be compensated in a Lucid car. But yes, this is really, really cool news and very interesting just to sort of look at it as a whole and see Saudi Arabia as home of electric vehicle producer. David, feel free to weigh in.
Well, I took a group of Saudis to Tesla to test the self-driving Tesla a few years ago. And, they were clearly into it. Saudi Arabia obviously has tremendous potential for alternate energy, to the extent that every barrel of oil that Saudi pumps can be turned into chemical feedstocks or, downchain, that's a win. And, it makes sense. They were clearly interested they're interested in being on the cutting edge of something and not just being the, consumers, the global consumers.
That's a good point. We've done a segment on automotive industry, and it harks back decades because it's always been an important goal for them. But this is one of the advantages of being in Saudi Arabia's position, where you don't have a legacy industry to worry about. They don't have an internal combustion engine production line. Toyota never came through with it. Nissan never came through with it. They can, and so this has happened so quickly. I mean, they first invested in Lucid in 2018.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's 2022, and Lucid is building a major electric vehicle manufacturer is building a plant in Saudi Arabia, just skipping the whole internal combustion, just moving straight to electric vehicles. It's a tremendous thing for Saudi Arabia, I think, because it's just interesting. They've always had this goal. 4 years ago, they had never imagined it would be an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
So there you go. Good for them, but thinking quickly on their feet. And as you say, Dave, moving forward on the technological front to stay at the front.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard, you mentioned this, I believe, but they're also rolling out a new car, a SUV. Is that correct?
They are. You mean Lucid? Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucid
and that should hit in a few years, but they will deliver the Lucid Air later this year, which looks super awesome.
I will say this because, Dave, you've mentioned this before. Sorry to interrupt, Lucian.
No, please.
Rawlinson, the chief engineer and the guy who basically is spearheaded and runs Lucid, is a detail guy. He's watched Tesla and all the I don't think Consumer Reports in this last auto rundown didn't even rate Tesla because they're so poorly rated.
Yeah,
there's too many problems, and I think Rawlinson is very committed to making sure that this vehicle, when it comes out, is going to work well and be reliable.
They did call it the car of the year, right? The Lucid Air that's forthcoming. Is that right? Yeah.
It got my vote.
Well, we're a little biased because we will soon be in receipt of our Lucid Airs, I'm sure. Richard, my one big thing this week, and the timing is very interesting here with everything going on in Ukraine, but Saudi Arabia is hosting its first ever major defense show this week. The World Defense Show begins in Riyadh in just a few days. Gentlemen, looks like a barn burner. The event will showcase the latest in defense industry tech. As you both know very well, Saudi Arabia is one of the top spenders globally on defense. In 2020, it was the sixth largest spender on defense, plopping down an estimated $57.5 billion, according to SIPRI. For this year, Saudi Arabia's budgeted defense spending is down from that figure at $45.5 billion. That's a trend in the right direction for Saudi Arabia as it looks to localize half of its defense spending by 2030. Back to the event itself, over 420 exhibitors are registered for the event, which will also feature a special zone for startups in the defense space. Saudi Arabia created a purpose-built space for this event, which will take place every other year, and it looks like American defense firms like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are among the 72 U.S. companies with a presence there. This is David, this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. It is a big deal. I mean, in the past, you had big air shows, most notably, usually in the UAE, Dimdex in Qatar, which is the maritime exhibit, and Saudi Arabia, as in so many other things, are kind of, the sleeping giant waking up saying, wait a minute, why are all these little countries having the big exhibitions? We're the big market. And I think that just given the scale, it's possible Saudi Arabia will eventually push these other shows out.
And Saudi Arabia, they're covering every sector of the defense field. I mean, it's not like you say, the Qatar is more marine, but this is, they're covering everything.
Yeah.
Including space, I saw was one of the focuses, which is really cool. The photos on the website are really interesting. They're sort of like renderings of what the future of combat and warfare might look like. It was really fun to sort of peruse that.
Sorry to interrupt, Lucian. So I guess in the run-up, this is the 6-9 March is the defense show. In the run-up, there's a Riyadh Defense Forum.
Yeah.
And it's hosted by International Institute for Strategic Studies. I think 300 of the world's most influential military and government figures. Dave, does a report come out of this, or is it really just the proceedings?
A report does come out of it. There's a number of articles that will be published along with it, but they're all published anonymously. So I will, when you get a copy, I'll let you figure out which one I wrote.
Well, if there's any mention of mothballing the Navy, I know it's yours.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We're negative references to Phil Mickelson. Yeah.
Well, that could be a bunch of papers, actually.
Yeah. So, it is. But so I spoke about how Saudi Arabia sees itself as the natural hub for all of this. So the IISS, their big Middle East event is the Manama Dialogue every year, and you have to wonder, will this push that out? So,
That's an interesting point.
It's quite telling that you've had a long-standing relationship there, and obviously there are different times of the year. So I'm sure that ISSS views it as complementary. But I think if I were the Bahrainis, I would be like, interesting. Okay.
Interesting. That is.
Oh, please, Richards. I'm sorry.
No, just the Manama event's a big deal.
It's a huge
It has been, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's either from the United States, it's either the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State goes. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a big deal. And, I'm sure that, I'm sure the Bahrainis are, taking a look around and taking stock.
Is there a sense on what Russian presenters or Russian companies are like? I mean, with everything going on and sort of a global action against Russia right now, and especially economically, is it awkward for them right now to be there if they are? And do you have any sense on that?
I don't, but imagine like technically you can't use a credit card if you're Russian now. So I think it'd be very hard. I imagine there'll probably be a lot of late minute cancellations, or maybe they'll present in virtually. But I'm sure all these defense entities are. It'd be hard to find a bank that would work with one of them at this point in time. The way the sanctions have been imposed, it's basically to leave just humanitarian stuff and energy flow and a weapons exporting firm. I don't see them getting an exemption from the sanction.
And actually that transitions very well to our main topic today, the meat of the sandwich. And we're very fortunate to have Colonel Des Roches with us on the program. This is a terrific opportunity to talk about the situation in Ukraine and the impact on the Middle East region. The sit rep in Ukraine is constantly evolving. All one has to do is open Twitter for about 5 seconds to see that. And so too is the geopolitical situation in the region and the world in the aftermath of the invasion. David, I think a great place to begin. The Wall Street Journal reports that U.S. allies and partners in the Middle East are sort of staying neutral or tempering their criticism on Moscow. Though many signed a UNGA condemnation of Ukraine yesterday, including Saudi Arabia, that's really all we've seen. Why do you think this is, and could this perhaps change?
Right. So the first thing we saw was the UN Security Council resolution. And in that, the UAE abstained. So that was seen in Washington as kind of like, although, it's worth noting, everybody knew that there would be a Russian veto. And so in terms of actually policy impact, an abstention from China or the UAE doesn't really mean anything. But that was seen as sort of an indication of hedging bets. And there's been this narrative since the F-35 sale to the UAE has reached, it's at an impasse. People are saying, oh, well, they're hedging their bets with Russia. And then there was also this idea that, the other country, Saudi Arabia, and most notably was also, hedging its bets, trying to move away from a unipolar world. It's hard to see. I'm finding it hard to disaggregate. Some of this may be geopolitics, the United States is a black box, Saudi Arabia is a black box, countries shouldn't be too close. But I think a lot of it's also personal. I think that, the president of the United States, called the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, called for him to be a pariah. And, I think that when you have that, and you have the president of the United States who has not had a meeting, and has his spokesman citing, obscure diplomatic protocol, as ways of not having a meeting with the person that everybody sees. And there was an article in the Atlantic today about Mohammed bin Salman that says, nobody outside of Saudi Arabia any future other than with him. They want to do it. So you've had the UN Security Council where Abu Dhabi abstained. Then you had the UN General Assembly vote where most of the GCC countries actually supported the resolution against Russia, but it's a symbolic resolution. And it's worth noting that some of the countries made statements. Saudi Arabia, I believe, did not make a statement. But again, their vote was welcome. And then the other thing was the OPEC plus meeting, which, the United States and some other Western countries had called for OPEC to increase their production in order to mitigate any downfall in Russian. They met for 13 minutes and they basically said, yeah, we're good. So, what you've had is a rebuff of Western led by American policy. But I'm not sure how much of it is geopolitics versus just trying to send a message to somebody, to an American president who, is, was seeking to distance himself from these countries and from their ruling regimes.
It's the Ukraine invasion has really put some of these relations in uncomfortable positions in terms of being scrutinized closely, and every action has a meaning, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, as you say. I mean, by the way, this includes Israel. Israel has
that's right.
Israel has hemmed and hawed, and as an American, it kind of made me uncomfortable. The sort of tepid, given our relationship with Israel for decades. And the UAE could argue, they wanted to be sure that the Russians came in on their side on the Houthi vote, to name them as a terrorist group. I have a question for you, Dave. And we know, I think we're familiar with the sense in the region with our traditional allies of concern about the U.S. after post-Afghanistan being less committed and more distracted, and hedging, looking at other alternatives. And we understand the look east with China because of the economic ties, and that's where the oil markets are primarily. Russia, we understand Russia has done an extraordinarily good job, practicing a sort of gray war, where using cyber and introducing themselves into unsettled areas like Syria and Libya, and they've gained a good bit of leverage. When they look at Russia, what are they looking at? I mean, literally, this is a country with the GDP the size of Brazil. I mean, it's less than Canada and South Korea. It's basically arms and minerals and commodities. It's a stagnant, sclerotic economy led by an erratic autocrat, essentially. I mean, is this truly the kind of partner they're going to be looking for? Or is it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just saying, I don't think they're looking for a partner. I think they're looking for the alternative to a hegemon. And the United States is a reluctant hegemon. I don't think we set out to be a hegemon, but basically we were the last man standing. And so there you had it. And you're right, though. I mean, if you can't eat it or burn it, or kill somebody with it, those are the only things Russia exports. It's weapons, fuel, and food. So that's basically a third world economy with a first world arms industry. And unfortunately, that means that they export a lot of nastiness all around the world. But the problem is, I don't think there's any great love for Russia. The problem, like so many things, that we view as American, it really goes back to Donald Trump. And he was so tight with these rulers that unfortunately the party in opposition, which is now the party of government, they came to see the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia in particular, and probably the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in special, they came to see him as kind of a proxy for Trump. And because they viewed themselves as friends of Trump, they were closely, together, and Trump was uncritical of them. They kind of said things about these countries, as a means of getting to Trump. I mean, people, Democratic congressmen who had no problem with the Yemen war while Barack Obama was president, flipped because Trump was there. And now that they're in government, these countries have said, well, wait a minute, this guy has spent, 8 years or 6 years calling us names. And then, he's the chairman of, a committee, influential committee. So that's caused these countries to say, wait a minute, this is an inconstant ally. And there's also uncertainty going back to the Arab Spring. And I've heard over and over again, the perception in the Gulf is that the United States abandoned Hosni Mubarak precipitously for no good reason. And so, they say, well, maybe we need to maybe not ally ourselves with this other country. Russia is the most willing. China is kind of playing it low because they basically just want to keep their commercial entities going. They don't want to provoke the United States. But it's good to have that as an option. They want to be able to, keep Russia in their back pocket so that whenever we get really tight and say, well, we're not going to sell you, more Patriot missiles unless you have a fully democratic election. They can say, well, okay, let's go talk about S-400. I think that's their deal.
I think that's great context, and I could lament about Donald Trump actions for hours, but to be equal opportunity here, from their side, and I've said to the Saudis in particular, you make a mistake, identifying yourself so closely with any particular political figure in the U.S. and this was a really this is something they thought was so promising, but as you say, the Donald Trump love for Donald Trump, the attraction to Donald Trump. Was a result of a retraction from Barack Obama, because adding the Hosni Mubarak embrace, it was very striking, and we're talking about commitments and who can we rely on when we didn't do anything when we set out a red line for Assad's chemicals. They were very put out when he negotiated an agreement with Iran without consulting Iran's neighbors. So they came into the Donald Trump situation with a real grievance and wanting to look for something else, which have resulted in as you sketched out, a difficult situation. And of course, they see Biden as an extension of Obama, which I do not think is accurate.
Yeah, no, they don't. But let me one other thing. So, in the campaign, I don't know if you remember going back, the invasion of Afghanistan. Originally, when we went into it, it was going to be called something like Noble Crusade, and in the Bush administration. And then somebody pointed out, crusade is not,
right.
You're fighting Muslim. Although, Dwight Eisenhower's memoirs of World War II were called Crusade in Europe, but set that aside. Okay, that was seen as, typical, George W. Rube from Texas. So Biden called for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to be a pariah. Now, think about that choice of words. Okay. What is a pariah? Well, first off, he's a Hindu. So you've got Crown Prince who leads a Wahhabi state, and you call for him to be treated as what in that are viewed as pagans, from a and to be the lowest class of a pagan religion. I mean, right. It was, we use it commonly in English, but I don't think we're aware just how, I think that word's a lot more insulting than it was intended to be. And, it's really unfortunate.
As with so many things, our domestic policies and those forces that compel politicians to say things and do things, like, we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan in 14 months. So that's a good negotiating ploy. Put us in a bad situation with our allies. And that was, that's a campaign trail thing. And, Joe Biden is smart enough to understand how important Saudi Arabia is to the U.S. across a broad spectrum. But that's what you say in the heat of a political race. This Atlantic article that you referenced, we were talking prior to the recording. That's where all the good stuff is, by the way. This Atlantic article that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman agreed to, you can really see the confidence that Saudi Arabia is feeling and that government is feeling. And, why not? I think, it's come out of the pandemic in a great situation economically. The oil prices are helping it, give it tremendous tailwinds. And his Vision 2030 has been remarkable in what it's achieved even to date, much less what it hopes to achieve. So they feel in a very good place, I think. I don't no state like Saudi Arabia, country like Saudi ever feels secure. And no country really should. They always be alert. But I think they feel like they're in a good place. Nobody likes Ukraine. It disrupts global markets, and it's going to put tremendous pressure in the region. Again, it's going to it's going to be a situation where haves and have-nots are hurts, because the Ukraine and Russia are such tremendous exporters of wheat and agricultural goods. And so, places like Lebanon is going to get crushed. Egypt, 70% come from.
70% of their wheat. Yeah.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states a little less so, but it's really going to have some fallout, just practical, impacts on living in a lot of the Middle East.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's first off, you've got a war. Secondly, you've got destabilization of energy markets, food markets. What really concerns me is Egypt, because when they tried to eliminate bread subsidies in Egypt, they had riots, and Saudi Arabia can afford to buy wheat at an expensive price, but Egypt can't. And everybody knows Egypt's important to the security of all the countries around it. So I'm greatly concerned about that disruption, and I don't see I don't see anything good coming from it.
So, Lucian, can I go off script here?
Of course.
I know
absolutely. It's a podcast.
I have right here the next question.
Sorry.
So, I think undeservedly so, the U.S. has taken a big beating about our withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Introduced a tremendous amount of doubt in terms of our allies. And I think it's a wrong take from Afghanistan, but that's just my position, and I won't share it with you here. But we're working from a perception here where our allies are wondering about us. Does our position, our behavior, and I think President Biden has done a remarkable job in mending ties with our EU neighbors and reconstituting and bucking up NATO in advance of this. Does this change anybody's perception in the region? So if you're the UAE, Saudi Arabia, you look at how Russia's behaving, you look at how the U.S. is behaving, you look at the unity of the U.S. and its primary allies. The Western Europe, we should never be separate from, in theory.
Well, good question. I mean, it's kind of a Rorschach test. It's like, what do you think about Biden? What do you think about Trump? I mean, on the one hand, this is Biden's presidency, and Germany has announced that they're finally taking defense spending seriously, and Sweden and Finland want to join NATO. But who's responsible for that? And the European narrative would be, well, we finally woke up to the threat that's on our shores. That's right next to us. So I can't tie the developments to anything other than a reaction to what, was just a discounted threat proving to be a serious threat. But, I mean, when you're the president, you get to take responsibility for good things that happen while you're president, and, good for him. But the Afghanistan, I think, when you go back to like December, what I said, and the start of the invasion, I said, well, Putin looked around him and he saw the United States that, just had chaos leaving Afghanistan. And we're going to be dealing with the problems there for a long time. Then you had a French president who, is going into a difficult election. You have a brand new German chancellor. You have a British prime minister who's on the verge of being thrown out because he held parties during COVID. So when are you going to get a weaker slate, to take action? And oil prices were what, $96 a barrel. Mm-hmm. So, it seemed like a good opportunity for Putin to do what he thought would be a quick, easy, lightning thing, and he'd have 2 weeks of international condemnation, and then everybody would turn to, the tennis or whatever, and he'd be good to go. So it's hard to say, but certainly, this is a sea change in how European partners of the United States view their defense responsibilities. And I mean, one thing I could say that's better about the Biden administration is that the people who are dealing with them have been in these positions before, so they kind of know how to deal with this stuff, and things are moving through the government normally, and people who work in government are having the opportunity, know how government's supposed to, are having the opportunity to comment on and shape the policy instead of, trying to get a line to chair it or whatever.
Or respond to a tweet, Yeah,
or respond to a tweet at 4 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a good thing.
If I could follow up on that just a little bit, I'm just sort of thinking about what's going on the ground right now in the Ukraine, and it's really hard to see this as anything but like it's already over and Russia has lost already, because while they may take Ukraine, the oligarchs are having their super yachts taken. Like you said, you can't use your Visa card anywhere you go. I mean, the economic sanctions are completely devastating. The ruble is way down. This is obviously not going at all like Putin thought it would. Yeah. And yet he's not stopping. And I'm sort of wondering, what does a hypothetical Russian victory look like now? Like, what can happen that Putin might say, I've won, I'm pulling out, or I've won and I've taken over? It doesn't seem like it is possible for him to, if he does take Ukraine, to govern it. And I'm just sort of wondering, what do you think is going to happen from here? And what do you think a hypothetical Russian victory looks like for him to claim at home?
Yeah, right now I think it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory at best. So I think what we're looking at is having failed in the bloodless, impressive lightning strikes, cyber, immobilizes the entire country, and then my 10 helicopter loads of commandos land at the airfield. We fly in the airplanes. They move in armored cars very quickly, grab the president, drag him off to Moscow, install our new president, and then we're gone. And Ukraine is still functioning, and it's just under new management. I think it's going to be like when Grozny in Chechnya. He has to win because the fact that you had a color revolution in Ukraine that started moving towards democracy on an imperfect with imperfect progress, but that's a precedent for him. And so he's like, I cannot allow that, because that might happen to him. So I think he, now he's committed the prestige of the Russian state. Sorry. He wants it to be the Soviet state, but it's the Russian state. So he's committed that, and he can't back down. He's in one of those positions where, you got pride involved. It's like, it's like somebody slapped him in a restaurant in front of his wife. He's going to fight to the death. And
at least subdue somebody with his judo move.
Yeah. Well, you saw his honorary presidency of the World Judo Federation was withdrawn.
And I don't mean to make light of it, but exactly, Dave. So this is why it's so scary.
Yeah. I mean, he put nuclear stuff on the table.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Oh yeah, we're going to higher resolve." And what's really amazing is, he's messaging at that level, and then at the same time, you have, and this has been going back for 30 years. Very frequent Russian overflights, military overflights, going to the colony of Kaliningrad, which is the ancient Prussian city that was awarded to Russia at the end of World War II, ethnically cleansed of all Germans, and made a Russian city, a little Russian island in Europe. For decades, Russian military planes flying there have overflown Finnish, Swedish, Danish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, Polish airspace. And he says his nuclear forces are on alert. And then you have, 5 military planes overflying Swedish airspace. It's like, come on, man. It shows kind of an imperfect command and control. That's something they do all the time. But you'd expect if he says, okay, this is a nuclear situation, he tells armed forces guys, be careful with how you fly. I mean, the U.S. was supposed to test the ballistic missile today. It was scheduled months in advance, and we postponed it because we said, no, we don't want this to be misinterpreted at all. But he's in a different. He's got different considerations, and I think he feels that if there's not a victory in Ukraine, even if that victory leaves Ukraine an ungovernable, economically unsustainable pile of rubble, if he does not have a victory, then his own rule is imperiled, and that makes him very, very dangerous.
Well, I think that's a really good overview and gives us some insight. And it's interesting when you outline the political situation of the UK, France, and Germany at the time when he's maybe brainstorming this. So in 2013, year before they invaded Crimea and took Crimea, the economic output in Russia was 2.2 trillion. Yeah. 2019, after sanctions have been applied, and so on, but pre-pandemic, economic output in Russia was 1.66 trillion. So it hadn't even recovered back to pre-Crimea. I can't imagine where it's going to be now. And
well, a lot of that is oil.
Oil,
price.
Correct. But I hear you on that. But that's not all their income. I mean, they're being shut out, financially, so many ways.
Yeah.
and that's gonna create tremendous pressure at home for the populace. Lending sort of contributing to what you're talking about. He's got this self-imposed onus to come with a victory or save face somehow.
Yeah.
And then he's going to have I can't imagine anything but a fairly disgruntled population that's paying higher prices, life is harder all the way around. Can't travel. All his cronies have assets taken away. As I said earlier, I don't understand why this master of the Great War, this master of coming right up to the threshold and moving back, but has been able to destabilize U.S. politics, been able to destabilize, all across the board, decides to do this. It's just extraordinary to me.
Yeah. Well, when you look back at it in retrospect, his victories have all come. It's really good selection of his victims. So one of the things we're talking about militarily in military circles is the basic unit that he's operating with. Basic military units is called a battalion tactical group, which has tanks and artillery and air defense and motorized infantry. But it doesn't have a lot of motorized infantry, and those troops are generally not very well trained. And it appears that they were designed to operate in places like Luhansk, where there was a local insurgency. And so the motorized infantry could just focus on traveling with the tanks as fast as they can. And if there's a roadblock, you dismount the infantry, they do it. But they wouldn't provide like flank security against saboteurs or hunter-killer teams, because your local auxiliaries, the Donetsk People's Republic, whatever the Russian lackeys are of the day, they would do that. And so now that he's in an area where he didn't have that, these guys are, road bound and scared and stuck, and logistical convoys being ambushed, and people run out of gas. So yeah, there's a lot of problems.
That's a distinction. Again, before we start recording, that's a distinction you drew between Crimea and this.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I think, when we're in a philosophical mood, one of the things military guys talk about is it better for an army to have a victory or a defeat? You always learn more from a defeat than from a victory. And I think that the Crimea victory was deceptively easy for him. And I think he just, imposed it, figured Ukraine would be Crimea writ large, relatively bloodless, relatively painless, really only of interest to a few people after a few weeks. He just
But as a layman, you hear all this out there. The Soviets are honing their craft in Syria, and he's ragging Donald Trump about his hypersonic missiles, and the sense has been that they've made leaps and bounds and have perhaps surpassed the U.S. in certain areas, and I don't ascribe, I think Russia's going to take Ukraine, and it's going to be ugly, and it's going to be, as you say, it's going to be a siege. I don't ascribe the failures to a lack of military prowess, but I describe it mostly to hubris.
Well, yeah, I think you can, but there are some concerning things. I mean, again, I went back to the point about local auxiliaries acting as security, and so in Syria, he had that. It was the Syrian Arab Army. He doesn't have it here. And there have been concerns about certain aspects. One of the weapon systems that people thought was a world beater up to about 5 years ago was the short-range air defense system, the Panzer S-1, which was actually purchased by the UAE, for example. And, the Russians have lost probably, I know prior to the war in Ukraine, 23 of them had been killed in places like Syria and Libya, and I think in Armenia, and they've lost a lot more. So, there are some basic problems. What we've seen is a lack of ability to target, which we also saw in Syria. You had indiscriminate bombing. They were good at bombing fixed infrastructure, hospitals in Syria. Because where those are. They're easy to find. And what we saw at the start of the Ukraine war, was a couple of missiles hitting fixed targets. Now we don't see military targets being hit by missiles. We see civilian infrastructure for the most part, because that's what you can find, which means they're unable to identify and shift targets hit these things. So they've got a problem there. They've clearly got a problem with deployable logistics. They've got a problem with command and control, where we see, a convoy bogging down and commanders being able to either reinforce that or shift their main effort around. Instead, they just push, which is why you get a 40-mile long convoy. But once it all gets bogged down, one thing they're very good at is bringing all the missiles online and all the rockets and artillery and shooting them all in one direction. So I fear that, they're going to revert to what they, do best historically. And boy, that's going to be ugly.
Yeah, I had seen some reports that surprised at the either reluctance to use or the shortage of precision guided munitions. Where
Yes.
are these?
Mm-hmm.
They just haven't been deployed in bulk there.
Yeah, what I've heard is shortage of, and also concern about. I think there's probably three things. There's a shortage of. I think there's a going back to that. I think they appear to have some problems with targeting, and so they don't want to use expensive, high demand, low density weapons until they're absolutely sure that they get a suitable target. And then I think also there's a fear that with their really good stuff, if they use it in Ukraine, it might find its way back here and be taken apart.
So a follow-up question to that, actually, and I just want to go on the record really quickly. I don't think that Russia is going to end up taking Ukraine. I just want to be I want to be on the record now. This thing lives forever on YouTube, so I just want to be on the record saying that. Of course, I could be wrong.
Okay, yeah. Let me give you. So I didn't get asked that question. I got asked, is Russia going to win? And
right. Or
what would a
Russian win look like?
Yeah. The beauty of being the aggressor state is you get to define what a win is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably the worst case scenario is, like, I don't see Russia attacking all the way to the border with Romania and Poland. I see them probably trying to hive off the area north of the Dnieper River and basically having everything east of the Dnieper and Crimea as one entity, possibly including the coast along Odessa. And then the rest of us, they'd leave this rump landlocked state that doesn't have any natural gas lines across it, and basically call that, and is occupied by Catholics, not Orthodox, and call that Farmlandia and leave that to itself as sort of a, like Moldova.
So my follow-up question was to that, because I'm very interested in, you mentioned sort of the failure of the invasion to work out as originally conceived or planned or executed. It turned into sort of this really violent situation, and now we're in this siege warfare situation you mentioned, where it's starting to get a lot less, focused on military targets and more on just destruction and trying to bend Ukraine to Russia's will. Yep. As the West watches that, and as the West sort of like looks at their sanctions, in place, obviously very devastating, but as the West watches, is there anything that can drag NATO into this short of an attack on NATO? Like, is there some shocking event that everybody in the West can say, all right, that we've had enough, we can't watch this anymore? I mean, do you see that happening at all?
Well, so a Romanian fighter airplane was reported lost over the Black Sea, and there was a little bit of a kerfuffle over that, and I think now it's appearing that was basically a training accident. There was an Estonian commercial vessel that has sunk. Appears that hit a naval mine off of Odessa. So, there have been some NATO assets that have been possibly involved in stuff, but I don't think so, to be honest. No. I think that if Putin meets, if he reverses his courses and meets with success, the guys that really are concerned about this are Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, which are also former members of the Soviet Union, although they were incorporated, relatively recently in 1940, while Hitler and Stalin were allied. And, like Lithuania, I think 40% of the population of Lithuania is ethnically Russian. So, those countries are very, very concerned. And I think that the alliance, and I think that those three members are like, this is horrible. But at the end of the day, when I worked NATO affairs, 2006, I was at a NATO defense ministerial, and there was discussion of Ukrainian accession to the alliance, and we're like, well, they're just not ready, and it's too far, and it's too hard, So, but these three countries are members of NATO, so I think I think they will say yes. Ukraine accession to NATO has been discussed. They're not members of NATO. We can't extend membership to them because of the situation, unfortunately. We do need to focus on the countries that are members of NATO, that either were part of the Soviet Union or were part of the Warsaw Pact, and I think particularly Poland, Romania, are very concerned about this, which, Putin has called for. If you take him at face value, his argument for Ukraine is identical to his argument for Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Mm-hmm. And, those countries, have very, they've got legit beef. Mm-hmm. So, well.
Yeah, it's, as far as I could tell, I'm not an expert, but Ukraine was not, there was significant reluctance on the part of NATO and key members to ever let Ukraine in. Yeah, I can't read Putin's mind. I mean, I don't know anybody who can, but I'm still bewildered by the tactics and the timing.
Well, what's so shocking about it is, until Putin went on the warpath, NATO was really nothing. Macron called it brain dead in 2016, and I keep reminding people as they forget. Everybody back to the Middle East. Everybody in the Middle East was terrified about the pivot. When the pivot was announced in 2010 in U.S. defense policy, they all thought that meant the United States says, "Okay, you're on your own. We're all going to Okinawa." But the pivot was really away from Europe, and we started withdrawing troops by 2014. 2014 was the first year since 1944 that there was not an American tank on German soil. Wow. We withdrew all our army. And what you saw was that European countries joined NATO, and then they said, okay, the Americans are here. We don't have to pay for defense anymore. And you see their defense spending going down. Germany particularly was, there was a remarkable tweet by the head of the German Armed Forces where he basically said, I can't do anything because we have systemic underinvestment. We don't have the capacity, which was just remarkable. A great act of political courage. But Putin's revitalized it. And the German spending bill is a sea change. Yeah. So he's kind of created what he claims to be frightened of. I mean, the European view of NATO prior to 2008, the Georgia War, was that it was the junior varsity European Union. It was where you went to prove that you could follow rules and participate, had some shared values, were capable of participating in Western European institutions so that you might eventually accede to the European Union. And the idea that it was a military alliance, I don't even think they drew defensive plans for the newly accessioned members of NATO because history had ended. They wouldn't need it. So, Putin has made NATO a military alliance again, and then it's just incredibly boneheaded.
This is, it's extraordinary. And to take some lingo from your favorite sport, Dave, this is really an own goal by Putin.
Yeah, it is. By the way, so Putin scored 4 goals against Alex Ovechkin when he was playing.
That's fascinating stuff.
Tough time for Ovi for sure. As a friend of Putin, I just saw that it just came on. Lukoil has called for an immediate end of the Ukrainian war. I think the pressure is really ratcheting up with every $800 million yacht that is seized or a Russian energy company that wants out. Very, very interesting stuff. Richard, do you have any more? I mean, I have 3 questions here that I'd love to ask.
I have a million, but we got it. Dave has a life. Actually, we have to stop at some point.
These reports that I have a life are exaggerated.
That's fascinating. Really good. I think this would be a good stopping point. Dave, is there anything you'd want to add? Is there something that you?
Well, I want to bring back to the Gulf. I mean, usually with every war, there's like a hot weapon system that comes out, and our partners in the Gulf in Saudi Arabia, are usually saying, okay, we want that, or we want something like it. So the Armenia war, it was the TB2 drone. With the Desert Storm was Patriot missile. What's really interesting here is we haven't seen a dominant weapon system emerge yet from this war. And I'm watching that kind of closely, and I'm watching, I'm conversing with a lot of our friends in the kingdom and places around it to see what's going to emerge as the big deal. But right now, as we were talking before we got on the air, most of the conversation today about military technology revolves around the tires that the Russians are putting on their vehicles. So
the Javelin.
Yeah, Javelin, of course. But Javelin's already been in play. Mm-hmm. And most of our partners already have Javelin.
Take a moment, David, and share us with this tire store, because that speaks to the preparation and planning.
Yeah. So this was a bunch of guys on military Twitter this morning. We're talking about when you look at all these really quite striking pictures of nearly pristine Russian vehicles abandoned, like an S-1 Panzer air defense system, which is supposed to be a world beater. The tires were either deflated or shredded. You'd see just axles. And the theory is that most military wheeled vehicles, even some track vehicles, have a compressed air inflation system where the operator can put more air in or take it out based on the surface that's going on. Well, if the vehicles have that and you don't fire them up every once in a while, you don't move them, the tires get eroded by sunlight. So you have to move the tires a lot. You have to cover them. You have to maintain them. And it appears that, you have a conscript army in Russia. So very expensive machinery. You only use it like once a year, and then you just leave it there and you polish it. And that the tires which looked like the Michelin XZL, which is like the state-of-the-art military tire, but apparently they are Chinese Yellow C20 tires. I got into this, which are an inferior substitute. And when you put in that compressed air, if they go off road, then you mess with the air and the sidewalls of the tires are blowing out. And so that both explains why you're seeing all this abandoned stuff, as well as why you have this long convoy and all these vehicles. Even when they run out of gas, they don't go off the road, because if they have to use the compressed air inflation system, then the tires will blow out. And of course, your next question is, why didn't they have spare tires? Well, that's where you get into the possibility of low-level corruption, because tires are one of the things, that militaries, they're expendable. So you can't, expect, if a unit gets 15 tires, you don't come back in a year and say, where are those 15 tires? Because you wear through them. But they do have commercial value and can't be sold. So, so it's a possibility of mismanagement, poor maintenance, and possibilities of low-level corruption.
So to our benefit, Dave is officially in the weeds. That's
yeah,
nice.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome. That's fascinating stuff.
and while we're mentioning Twitter, follow Dave on Twitter at DB Des Roches. Just really, really good stuff. I mean, it's your way in this, so it's a great follow. Do yourself the biggest favor you'll do yourself this week and follow David on Twitter. Let's move on to Yallah, gentlemen. Richard, go ahead and get us started.
Yallah, yes, Yallah, big finish. I have that in parentheses.
Nice.
One.
You're back on the script now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. According to a report in Arab News, Saudi Arabia on Monday welcomed the UN Security Council's resolution labeling the Houthi militia fighting Yemen a terrorist group, in addition to expanding the scope of existing arms embargo to encompass the entire membership of the Iran-backed group, which was previously limited to specific individuals and companies.
Dave, is this a big deal?
It is. I mean, the big concern, of course, was the Biden administration removing the Houthis from the terrorism sanctions list. And that wasn't really understood. I mean, I think that, first off, the Trump administration didn't put them on the list until they were out the door, like the last week of their time, because they realized the problems it would cause for humanitarian agencies. The Biden administration removed it. Our friends in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, they believe that that meant the United States said, "Oh no, the Houthis are the same as the International Red Cross," but the Houthis actually remained, in the they're described as a terrorist movement in the State Department reports on terrorism. It was just a specific policy step of economic sanctions. That distinction is lost in the Gulf. Nobody gets that. So I think that anything that labels the Houthis are a terrorist movement, and I think that anything that labels them that way is a good thing. I do agree that the specific U.S. government sanctions would basically make starvation in Yemen worse, and we basically made a policy decision that the hostage takers would not suffer as much as the hostages, which I agree with.
Tough situation. Number 2, another week, another big Saudi IPO. Nadi Medical Company, Saudi Arabia's market leader in retail pharmacies, aims to raise up to 5.11 billion rials, $1.36 billion, or 1.2 Russian yachts, in the country's biggest IPO since Saudi Aramco's listing in 2019, according to a report in Reuters. Also recently, Al Dawa Medical Services Company, one of the largest pharmaceutical retail companies in Saudi Arabia, announced that it will list 25.5 million shares on the Saudi stock market, seeking to raise about $500 million. 2 big pharma IPOs in the last week. The IPO market in Saudi Arabia is red hot.
Yeah. Isn't it great? Neither one of these has an apparent government connection. I mean, 10 years ago, any kind of company that, was just 1 or 2 steps removed from the government. This is really free market stuff. I mean, the market reforms, and come on, capital is the ultimate coward, right? So the fact that people are willing to put millions of dollars in their own stuff into a commercial market that, in the United States is more heavily regulated than it is in Saudi Arabia, really shows just the progress that they've made, that they can appeal to individual investors, who are making financial decisions. It's not a patriotism levy for a parastatal firm. I think this is just incredible. It shows how far we are, towards the goals of Vision 2030.
That's such a great point.
Yeah, that hits it right on the head. I mean, you've got 50 applications for IPOs in 2022. And just as you say, that's because it's a real deal. This is, and they're not all. Some of them are PIF owned. Some of them are hiving off of a government entity of other sort. But the majority of them now are private companies going public for good financial reasons.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a little bit. I think this is that Atlantic article on Mohammed bin Salman. About Mohammed bin Salman, along with his participation. One of the things he says, one of it talks about is his frustration with the U.S. and not understanding how much has changed. And this is an example of real change. A significant accomplishment to create this kind of market that, as you say, is not contingent on government inducement or other reasons. It's just it happens because it makes good financial sense.
Yeah.
Number 3, Saudi Arabia announced the discovery of 5 new gas wells in 4 separate regions across the kingdom with the capacity to produce 100 million cubic feet per day. The fields are all non-associated, and 2 of them would produce unconventional shale gas.
Great.
That's great news. So it's not a huge adjustment in their total output. They're putting out 11 billion per day now, but it's still significant.
This is piling on. Mm-hmm. They have the second largest gas reserves in the world. So I mean, I think this is notable mostly because it's non-associated, and but it is good. It is good, and they really want to ramp up natural gas production. So it's great news. We don't know if any of these will actually come into play, but it's nice to know you have them.
Well, the last time I looked at it, this is a little bit of part of my field, but the last time I looked at this, the Saudi demand for gas exceeded supply, and they were burning oil to generate electricity. So, that oil needs to go into chemical feedstocks. It needs to go into more higher value added things. And, I think natural gas is, for domestic purposes, is the way to do that.
Spot on.
Number 4, local runner Emblem Road, long shot, was the shocking winner of the $20 million Saudi Cup the Saudi-trained horse rallied with a wide, sweeping move on the outside to win the $20 million Saudi Cup at 80-1 odds. I hope you gentlemen didn't lose your betting tickets. Established in 2020 and organized by the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Cup is a 2-day international racing festival headlined by the $20 million prize. Richard, you sent me a video of this as soon as it happened. It's crazy stuff.
Awesome.
It's awesome, yeah.
If this is completely inappropriate, but if I'm playing golf with a buddy or not golf, let's talk a real sport for Dave's purpose. But somebody makes. I'm playing basketball.
Wait, we did mention golf.
I'm playing basketball, and somebody's really hot. I say, you must be going. You must have gone to church this Sunday.
Right.
And I think the Saudis have been going to church to really mix metaphors, because all their major sporting events have coincided with enormously exciting. The Formula One race, that whole season was massively exciting. One of the most exciting seasons in recent memory. This Saudi International, your good friend Harold bin Varner.
Harold bin Varner. Yeah, bin Harold. Yeah.
Harold Varner III. Lucian said that's how he's known in Saudi Arabia. But
Harold bin Harold Al Varner. Sorry.
he hits a 90+ foot putt on 18 to win it. And then we have this locally raised and trained and 80-1 horse come wide on the turn, come thundering down the final stretch to take the richest cup in the world. Things are going well in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I'm just happy if I had money on an 80-1 horse in 2 years, I would not own anything, because I would bet on other horses. Try to do that again.
Well, we all know the answer to that is go to church, Dave.
Yeah. So here's enough church, looking for that next 80-1 winner. Oh my God.
Here is a question: Is there sports betting in Saudi Arabia now? I don't think there is.
No, I don't think so.
But you can Bodog or whatever offshore.
Well, actually, because I think it's mandated, you can't have sports betting without alcohol. So therefore.
That's right. You don't want too much judgment in your sports betting.
No, exactly.
I'm trying to think, when I go to off-track betting, I can't recall if I've seen wagers taken on. I don't know.
Yeah. Number 5, construction of the Qatar-Saudi Arabia section of the long-planned GCC railway project will begin soon. The 2,177-kilometer project is expected to cost $250 billion. Each of the 6 nations will be responsible for implementing the portion of the project that lies within their territory. So
overdue.
Yeah, overdue is the word. But and because this has been planned for years. If it was ever going to happen, it happened now, don't you think, Dave? There's some rapprochement. There's money.
Well, you've got rapprochement, and you've got Brent crude at $120 a barrel. So let's there's an economic impetus for it. There's political impetus for it with GCC unification. There's social impetus for it. There's a military impetus for it in terms of securing. There needs to be a stable rail link connecting the states on the Gulf with the ports on the Red Sea, both to eliminate port congestion as well as just for security planning. Yeah.
Excellent point.
No completion date yet set for that, but long overdue. Agreed. Number 6, Saudi Arabia's newest travel experience is inspired by the renowned Burning Man Festival in the United States. Caravan by Habitas Al Ula will open in March in one of the oldest cities on the Arabian Peninsula. Surrounded by mountains and ancient Nabatean settlements, Caravan Al Ula consists of 22 Airstream trailers. Glamping has hit Saudi Arabia. Actually, glamping's kind of always been around. At least every time I've been camping in Saudi Arabia, it has not been bare bones. But very, very cool to see this. Al Ula is really rad. We got to check it out soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, with this option, we may actually be able to afford to check it out, because the Caravan, the Airstream cost, it says it's about $400 per night, as opposed to the Habitas Al Ula, which is much more upscale. Mm-hmm. So, I'd be more than willing to stay in an Airstream in Al Ula.
Yeah. I got to tell you, Yallah has such buzz, and I have to go there, but it just, it's like the hidden treasure.
Absolutely.
It looks so cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Colonel Des
Pleasure,
Roches,
Shane.
just the best guest. Very interesting discussion we had on Ukraine. Follow him on Twitter. Dave, thank you so much. This was a really great discussion. Would love to have you back as soon as you can do it.
Oh, it's an honor. It's an honor. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dave. As I said, you're the greatest of all time for 966.
And we didn't talk golf at all, which is kind of amazing.
I noticed
a little bit, yeah.
Except for Henry Ben Henry. Yeah. Oh, no. Thanks, guys.